Okay, I'm not using slides, so my name is Anna. Just throwing that out there. Okay, I'll start off being brutally honest with all of you. In the most generally accepted form of the term, I by no means fit the position of an activist. I didn't even start recycling until last year, and I still have trouble with it. Turns out, I've been doing the whole thing wrong. What's worse, so has my mom. You see, our whole life, we thought that things that we deem trash are things that we personally don't need anymore, things we're disposing of. So when I learned about recycling, I was thrilled, actually, because I thought I had been granted my own personal in-home goodwill. I recycled almost everything. I threw toys in there. I recycled my brother's toothbrush a few times, actually. And I threw tons of old books in there. And as far as recycling goes, my mom understood it the exact same way that I had, except she had very specific recycling goals. Anna, if you don't clean your room, I'm gonna recycle it. Okay, Mom. Turns out she was absolutely not kidding. All of the clothes that I left on the floor were magically taken care of over the course of a couple months. Anyways, now you're like, she's definitely not an activist, she's an idiot. Well, yes. But before we get started, let me lay out a few of my credentials for you, okay? Redemption. I was, and more or less still am, the most politically irrelevant person. Seriously, I don't know anything. Just this year, I learned that there was such a thing as a third-party candidate. I didn't know that you could write in a name on a voting ballot. I have absolutely no idea how many people are in the House or the Senate. And my whole life, I believed that all voting booths were in Catholic churches. Because one, that's where we've always been districted. And two, I thought that they did that intentionally so that everyone could either feel the love or the wrath of God, and therefore become compelled to vote correctly. I can securely name the first three, the 16th and the 20th president, and maybe the last two. I know there was a George Bush, and I know that after him, or maybe before him, there was another Bush, but I don't know the difference. The only thing I know about either of them is that they don't know how the checkout works at a grocery store. All of that probably just proves I need to take a history class, but hopefully you get the point. I'm totally unqualified to give a speech on activism, or any speech at all for that matter. But I didn't get up here and show you how big of an incompetent idiot I am for no reason. Have a 30-second conversation with me and you could easily figure that out on your own. But I've always wanted to be an activist. I've always aspired to be Maya Angelou and Mother Teresa's love child, but I always thought I wasn't qualified. I went to an all-white elementary school, and when I wasn't there, I was suffocated in a room with 100+ Egyptian relatives. I didn't know anything about diversity. I went to an elementary school that was extremely Christian and conservative. And when I wasn't there, I was surrounded by like-minded Middle Easterners who had never seen nor wanted to see a gay person. I didn't know a thing about the LGBTQ+ community. I went to an elementary school that only had a dress code for girls, and when I wasn't there, I stood inside the walls of a church that silenced and subdued its women. I didn't know a thing about feminism. My whole scripted life literally shows you I'm not cut out to be an activist. Nothing in my DNA or my biology associates Anna with activist. I'm not a green guru. I recycle toothbrushes. I'm not politically relevant. I thought all voting booths were in Catholic churches. But one thing that I could do, take a theology class. All right, so let's get one thing straight. Everyone who hears that is all impressed, right? And I honestly don't get why. I go to a church that conducts its mass in Greek, Coptic, and Arabic. I went and learned those languages thinking it would help me understand what I was spending my Sundays doing, and it didn't at all. So I decided to take a class and try and understand a few things, but it's nothing special. Essentially, it's me and a bunch of aspiring clergy, so a bunch of 50-plus-year-old men in a room, which you can imagine is incredibly boring. For example, last class, I started writing my senior debate banquet reflection and finished it. Okay. So I started taking this theology class my freshman year of high school, and I fell in love with its conceptual and philosophical depth. About a year into the course, though, we started our people unit, which was just about understanding the timeline of people with major influences on Coptic orthodoxy from the church's formative years till now. I hated that unit, and I always will. Why? Not a single woman appeared on that timeline. What's worse, a lot of the men that we were hailing for their noble contributions to church history had absolutely no respect for women. I remember scrolling through countless quotes from church fathers asserting that women were the root of all evil and had no inherent worth unless they were married to a man. So, as you can see, Coptic orthodoxy and feminism don't exactly go hand in hand. Well, lucky for me, I'm a fiery feminist and also a Coptic Christian, so that worked out quite nicely. In light of my anger, I started a blog. Yes, I am one of those people. Look to WordPress to solve all of life's problems. Well, I started writing. Thanks, Ms. Malloy. I started writing from everything from the theological justification for keeping women out of important roles in church to my own personal journey, trying to reconcile my faith with the gap in gender equality. By chance, an editor found me, emailed me, phoned me, asked me to write a piece for her, and offered me a job. And that's where my journey really began. I'm a religious activist, and the next time that you hear religion and activism in the same sentence, please phone me because either you're drunk or the person in front of you is. Seriously, when have you ever heard those two terms in positive correlation with each other? When I applied to give this talk, I had to explain what my big idea was. And I honestly didn't think that I even had one. I was just channeling heart into my work and writing, and that's it. But luckily, I have one genius of a college counselor who told me, you have to talk about your interdisciplinary activism, Anna. That's it. That's all this is. And suddenly, I realized that my work with the intersection between gender studies and theology, my work to close the gender gap in the Coptic Church, made me an activist. And even though recycling your brother's toothbrushes is pretty bad, I realized that I didn't have to be a go green guru or a political wizard to be an activist. Here's the catch though. Maybe I'm the first person to officially talk about it or illuminate the concept for an audience. But so many people that have come before me and will come after me have perfected and will perfect the craft of channeling activism through their totally tangential fortes and interests and passions. In fact, one of my favorite interdisciplinary activists is someone you're most likely familiar with, Brandon Stanton, a pretty ordinary guy famous for collecting pieces of the story of the human race. He started his quest in New York to later pursue his journey internationally in 12 countries. Stanton's Humans of New York blog is without a doubt an internet phenomenon because he took something as simple as a camera and he used it to tell people stories from all over the world, creating a melting pot for human appreciation and diversity. He gives us only pieces of lives, from the wealthy like Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds to the impoverished still in pursuit of their dreams, but in doing so, in telling one fragment of an individual story, he destroys all socioeconomic barriers. He simplifies humanity to humans without any sort of adherence to societal norms or expectations. His ability to extract deeply rooted emotions from absolute strangers only to capture them in a photo to share with the world is a pure form of interdisciplinary activism. But interdisciplinary activism doesn't stop at the humanities or theology or history or photography. W.E.B. Du Bois, possibly the coolest guy ever, not because he's from Massachusetts, just like me, or because him and Booker T. Washington absolutely hated each other, or even because he was an adamant feminist in the early 1900s, but because he essentially invented a science. Well, he was the pioneer of what we now call call sociology. And I know a lot of people would argue that that's not actually a science, but they are wrong. He is a genius psychoanalyst who invented the theory of double consciousness, which he explains envelops the internal conflict of subordinated groups in an oppressive society, essentially how minorities and the oppressed try and evaluate themselves by the standards of the majority and the oppressors. He took psychoanalysis, a science, and funneled it to pioneer an entire human rights campaign. But W.E.B. Du Bois in the early 1900s was only the catalyst for medical activism. Dr. Kevin Thomas, a current cardiologist at Duke who essentially practices interdisciplinary activism as an established profession. He deftly analyzes racial health disparities. And his work primarily deals with closing the racial treatment gap, and he's been working on equal administration of treatment to minorities for the past 20 years. So I'm sure you get the point. So many people could have sold themselves short because they lacked the mainstream activist factor. If Brandon Stanton hadn't taken up street photography, my Instagram feed would be 20 times less interesting. But more importantly, so many stories wouldn't have been shared. A lot of people don't know about the Humans of New York blog, but just think about how many moments in time that Stanton made someone feel human, feel vulnerable, feel the pleasure of having their own story to tell, something that's relevant, something that matters. That, in its essence, is activism. If W.E.B. Du Bois hadn't taken a leap of faith in psychoanalytic activism, we probably wouldn't have a developed understanding of sociology whatsoever. Now, I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, my life tells you I shouldn't be here. I should not be an activist, moreover versed in it enough to give a speech on it. And in the grand scheme of things, when I think about it, my work with feminism and religion is practically pointless, and that's so scary to me because interdisciplinary activism is scary. It seems like you don't have a goal, you don't have a focus, you won't see results. It gets muddy and foggy all too often. I give up a lot, not only because the work gets frustrating, but because it feels like I stand alone. Interdisciplinary activists are often so unique in their pursuits, their work so obscure, that it just seems like the whole thing doesn't make sense. But what I'm trying to tell you is don't let conformity hinder you from becoming an activist. Of course, the people that we typically associate with activism are vital to positive societal growth and change. But interdisciplinary activists are just as valuable. You don't have to want something huge. You don't have to aspire to overturn establishments and redefine society. Take your interests and your passions, your heart's longings and desires, and mold it into something beautiful. That's all I did. I'm still getting to the beautiful part. Things are still rough around the edges. And even when I think my work is too focused to count, even when I think I don't have a goal, even when I know that I can't competently have a conversation about politics, even when I recycle toothbrushes, I still believe in this intersection, this harmony between two totally disparate things. I am still in constant search of the other interdisciplinary activists who made it. Sometimes it helps to realize I'm not groundbreaking, that the foundation is already there. Because if all I have to do to be an activist is listen closely to my heart, hey, I'm pretty down for that. Thank you.